Who has the best roster in the NFL entering the 2022 NFL season? Today, I will rank the top 32 rosters in the NFL from 32 to 1. But before I do that, guys, make sure to like this video and subscribe to this channel for more NFL content. And make sure to follow my social medias in the description down below. And without further ado, let's get right into my NFL roster rankings. Before we get into the rankings, though, just real quickly, just like last year for my roster rankings, if you guys want to go check out my roster rankings from last offseason, you're more than welcome to. I may link it in the description, but I have a grading system here. I have a criteria for how I'm ranking these rosters. I have put every single starting player in the NFL into a tier. So the tiers are elite. If you're an elite player, you are worth 10 points. A very good player is worth 8 points. A good player is worth 6 points. A solid player is worth 4 points. A rookie is worth 2 points. And a weak player or a below average to bad player is ranked as 1 point. And that is for offense and defense. As for the kicker and punter, as you can see, elite players are worth 5, very good 4, good 3, solid 2, rookie is 1 point, as well as weak being 1 point. That is the criteria for how I'm grading all of these rosters. So if you want to get mad at something, get mad at the criteria for being how it is, but that is the criteria for how these rosters will be ranked. At number 32, the worst roster in the NFL, according to me, entering the 2022 season, is unfortunately for Houston Texans fans, it is the Houston Texans. The Houston Texans are one of the few teams, I believe they might be the only team actually, without an elite player. They have one very good player, that is Brandon Cooks, who is a stud and has been for years. But other than him, they don't really have too much. I mean, they've got a couple good players. I like some of their edge guys. I think Laramie Tunsil's been good at left tackle. I don't think he's been great over the last couple years, but he's good. They've got a couple solid players like Nico Collins. I think some of their interior defensive line guys are a bit underrated. But overall, you look at the amount of weaknesses on this team, you see that there are, I think, 9 players. Yeah, 9 players in that weak tier, and that is by far the most of any tier for the Texans here, as well as a couple rookies starting, which doesn't help them either in terms of proven quality players. So the Texans roster comes out to a total score of 73, which was pretty clearly the worst here. I do think they have some decent depth pieces, but overall, from a starting roster perspective, the Texans are pretty clearly the worst in the NFL, according to me, at number 32. At number 31 out of the Chicago Bears roster, the one elite player on the Bears roster is their kicker, Cairo Santos, who has been very good and reliable for them. At least he was certainly last season. So that is a good thing for the Bears. They've got a couple very good players with Mooney and Whitehair and Robert Quinn. And right now, Roquan Smith, but he has been in trade rumors recently. So we'll see what happens there. But overall, again, a lot of weak players. You look at the offensive line, 4 of the 5 starters are weak. They have a rookie and a weak receiver alongside Mooney. The interior defensive line is weak. They have a weak linebacker. Graham Jr. at nickel is pretty weak. Justin Fields and Eddie Jackson. Jackson's been elite in the past, but hasn't been the last couple years. Fields, I'm going to put in now as solid because I did see some nice things from him last year, but he hasn't proven to be anything more than that, at least just in year 1. So we'll see what happens with the Bears roster, where right now it's certainly one of the weakest in the NFL, comes out to a total score of 85 and comes in at number 31. At number 30, my Atlanta Falcons roster. The Falcons roster comes in with a total score of 87. Couple elite players, Kyle Pitts, AJ Terrell, Younghoe Koo even at kicker. We've got a very good couple of players with Lindstrom at guard, Grady Jarrett in the interior defensive line, and Hayward, who they added at corner. Also have a couple of good players, Jake Matthews and Matt Hennessy. But overall, again, a ton of weak players. I have 12 weak starters currently on this team. That's half the depth chart. So that's not very good. But Drake London coming in, the rookie wide receiver, we'll see what he can do. I have some high hopes for him after not being the biggest fan of him. I've studied him a bit more. I'm a bit higher on him now. So I think the Falcons roster is certainly one of the weakest in the NFL, and they come in for me at number 30 with a total score of 87. At number 29, I have the Seattle Seahawks roster. The Seahawks roster is certainly weakened with the loss of Russell Wilson. I'm not sure who they'll start at quarterback currently. I think it might actually be Geno Smith, who I have as a weak player, obviously. They have 8 weak starters, so about a third of the starting lineup. They've got a couple solid guys, quite a few solid guys, actually. You look at Lewis and Jackson, the guard duo. Nwosu at edge, Woods in the interior defensive line, Jones at corner, Coleman in the nickel, and then Dixon's been a solid punter. He's been better than that in the past. This was, I believe, solid last season. Of course, the one elite guy for them, DK Metcalf. We'll see how he does this year without Russell Wilson. We've got Tyler Lockett, Brooks, who I think is very underrated at linebacker, and Quandre Diggs, who's been very good for a couple years. They've got, of course, the rookie coming in with Charles Cross, and then Fant, Ford, Adams, and Myers, I believe, are all good players. So that comes out to a total of 91. The Seahawks are certainly one of the worst rosters in the NFL, with the number of weaknesses they have combined with the fact that they don't have that many good players. They have as many weak players as they do elite, very good, and good players. So at number 29, I have the Seattle Seahawks roster. At number 28, I have the Jacksonville Jaguars roster. Of all of these bottom 5 rosters, the Jags to me are the ones with the by far most potential to be higher on this list this season, because I see a lot of young talent here. Brandon Scherf, they added in free agency. He's an elite right guard, even though he's getting a bit older. Josh Allen and Alua Khan are very good players. They added a couple good players as well with Christian Kirk, specifically Darius Williams as well, nickel. Shaquille Griffin is there. So they've got some nice players in the secondary. They've got a nice receiver now with Kirk, but the number of solid players on this team is really actually surprising. They've got 10 solid starters on this team. Lawrence Etienne, Marvin Zay-Jones, Evan Ingram, Cam Robinson, Fatusuki in the interior defensive line, Roy Robertson-Harris, Tyson Campbell, and Santoso, their kicker. All of those guys, I believe, are solid, and all of those guys, most of them at least, are pretty young with a lot of potential, so they could all become, or a lot of them could become good players this year. They've got not actually that many weak players. Shatley and Taylor on the offensive line and the safety duo, I think, are weak. But other than that, not that many weak players. And they've got a couple rookies there. Of course, the number 1 pick, Trayvon Walker, as well as Devin Lloyd at linebacker. The Jags come out to a total score of 95. But I could see them being better than some people think roster-wise this season due to the young potential that they have. So the Jags come in at number 28. At number 27, I have the New York Giants roster. The Giants are another team that does not have an elite player, but unlike the Texans, I do think they have more talent sprinkled throughout the roster. 5 very good players with Saquon Barkley, an excellent interior defensive line duo of Leonard Williams and Dexter Lawrence, Adoree Jackson, who's very good at corner, and Xavier McKinney, quietly one of the better safeties in the NFL. I like Tony at receiver. I really like Andrew Thomas and what he's become over the last couple of years at left tackle. Glowinski at right guard, who they added from the Colts, is a good player. Blake Martinez has been a good player for a couple years now. Gano is a good kicker. The solid position, Daniel Jones, we'll see. This is prove it year with Brian Dable. Galladay, I think at this point is solid. He was once very good, but not anymore. Ujulari, I think, is a solid edge player with potential to be better. Julian Love at safety is kind of just stuck in this solid tier. He has been pretty solid throughout his entire NFL career. They've got several weak players, but they also have a couple rookies, Wando Robinson, Evan Neal, who I love, who was my favorite player in the NFL draft. I thought he was the best player in the NFL draft. And Kayvon Thibodeau, who has a lot of potential off the edge. So the Giants roster coming in at a score of 96. I do think they lack some truly upper echelon, truly elite talent, but they certainly have more talent than some of the other rosters down the line, like the Texans, for example, which is why they rank so much higher, or fairly higher and higher on the score total score for the roster because they have just more talent overall sprinkled in. At number 26, I have the Detroit Lions roster. The Lions have one elite player, that is Frank Ragnow at center, who was injured for them last year. But when he's been on the field, he's been absolutely awesome. Top 5 center in the league. They've got Hawkinson, Decker, and Sewell, who are all very good. Many good players. You look at Swift, Chark, St. Brown, Jonah Jackson, Harris on the edge, and Amani at corner. It's hard to pronounce the last name. Orawari. That's my best guess at it. Goff, I think, is a solid quarterback. Vaitai is solid. The interior defensive line duo is solid. They do have several weak players with Ford and Anzalone at linebacker, Okuda and Parker. Deshaun Elliott, I think, is a weak player at this point, and the kicking and punting game is pretty weak. But I like the rookies they have, Jameson Williams and Aiden Hutchinson, who they drafted. So that's enough to put them over that 100 mark at 101 and separate them from the worst rosters in the league. So they come in at number 26 in my NFL roster rankings. At number 25 of the Arizona Cardinals roster. Now, this may come to a bit of a shock because I know the Cardinals roster is liked by a lot of people. But when you look deeper into it, it's not very strong, at least to me. First of all, there's no injection of rookie talent into the starting lineup, at least according to our lads right now. The only elite players are DeAndre Hopkins, who's suspended for the first few games, and Budda Baker. You've got Watt and Jalen Thompson, who are very good, as well as Matt Prater at kicker, but he's a kicker, so a very good kicker doesn't exactly help them in terms of the score. They have a lot of good players. Murray, Connor, Marquise Brown, Zach Ertz, Justin Pugh, Rodney Hudson, Marcus Golden, Byron Murphy. But because none of those guys I think are very good, it kind of hurts their ranking here. Moore, Humphreys, Simmons, and Collins are all solid. And then Will Hernandez and Kelvin Beachum, that's a really weak right side of the line. Both of those guys have just kind of proven to be bad players. Kennard and Allen on the defensive line are pretty weak. Hamilton and Wilson and the outside corner spots are weak. And then Andy Lee is, I think, a weak punter. So the Cardinals roster to me has been completely overvalued by a lot of people because they have a lot of flashy players. But when you look deeper into it, it's not all that strong. And for me, comes in surprisingly low at number 25 with a score of 111. At number 24 on the Carolina Panthers roster, the Panthers roster has separated themselves from the worst in the league, but they're still, I don't think, towards the upper echelon or really all that close in the NFL right now. They come out to a total score of 112. They have 2 elite players to me. That's Christian McCaffrey, a running back, and Zane Gonzalez, a kicker. I think Zane Gonzalez is a very good kicker, and I even think he's an elite kicker. They've got several very good players, which helps their ranking here. DJ Moore, Taylor Moton, Ron Burns, Shaq Thompson, J.C. Horn, and Jeremy Chin. They've got a couple of good players with Bozeman and Corbett in the offensive line. Also in the interior defensive line with Brown and Ioannidis. They have some solid players. Baker Mayfield, I think, is a solid quarterback. I don't think he's a weak quarterback, but I don't think he's a good quarterback. Robbie Anderson is a solid receiver. Used to be good, but I think took a step back last year. Jackson at corner is solid, and Xavier Woods, I think, is a solid safety. The weak players are currently Marshall and Tremble at receiver and tight end. I think Christensen's right now a weak left guard. I think Yetur Gross-Matos has potential, but I still think from what he's shown, he's a weak edge player. Wilson, I think, is weak at linebacker. Henderson, I think, is weak at corner. And I think Hecker, though he once was elite, has regressed to weak at punter. And Ikem Ekwonu, who they drafted this past draft, is the lone starting rookie for this team. So that comes out to a total score of 112 of the Carolina Panthers roster right now at number 24. At number 23 of the New York Jets roster, the Jets are the other team, I think, outside of the Texans and Giants, that does not have an elite player currently. But what helps them more than those other teams is the number of very good and good players they have. I think Tomlinson, McGovern, Lawson, Franklin Myers, Williams, and Mosley are all very good players for the New York Jets. I think Whitehead and Reed and Vera Tucker and Moore and Fant and Brown, who they just signed, are all good players. So that's 12 good players. That's half the roster, the starting roster that's good. I look at Zach Wilson as a solid quarterback. I do think he'll play for about 13, 14 games. He may miss the first couple weeks, but the majority of the season, I think he'll be solid. I think Uzoma's a solid tight end. I think Davis is a solid receiver. I think Alexander is a solid linebacker. They are weak at punter. They are weak with LaMarcus Joyner, a player who has declined in recent seasons, and are weak at nickelback. And they've got many rookies. They are starting Garrett Wilson. They're starting Breece Hall. They're starting Jermaine Johnson. They're starting Sauce Gardner. All players that I like. All players that I think have a lot of potential to be very good this season and in their careers. But they just haven't shown it yet, which is why the Jets are a little lower here. But still, at number 23, given where the Jets roster has been in recent years, I think if I were a Jets fan, I'd be happy with that. So at number 23, with a total score of 113, the New York Jets. At number 22 of the Pittsburgh Steelers roster, the Steelers roster has certainly taken a hit in recent seasons from being one of the better rosters in the NFL just a couple years ago. I look at their elite players. They still have several. Deontay Johnson, I think, has ascended into elite status as a wide receiver. There you go, Dan. TJ Watt, Cameron Hayward, Minkah Fitzpatrick, and Chris Boswell, I think, are all elite players on defense and special teams. Harris, I think, is a very good running back. I think James Daniels is a very good right guard. I think Claypool's a good receiver. I think Freiermuth is a good tight end. I think Alualu is a good interior defensive lineman. I think Miles Jack is a good linebacker, even if he hasn't always played like it. I think he has the talent. I think his talent is good, and I think he's shown it at times. I think Dotson's solid. He wasn't last year. He was the year before. He was good the year before. So just kind of rounding that off, I think he's overall a solid player. Highsmith, Bush, Witherspoon, Wallace, and Sutton. The corner core is all solid, really. I think Trubisky's a weak quarterback as of right now. I think he's a high-end backup, low-end starter. I think Moore is a weak left tackle. I think Cole and Okafor are weak at center and right tackle. I think Edmonds is a weak player at safety, and I think they have a weak punter. And Pickens has been dominating camp. He looks like Megatron out there, apparently, according to the Steelers, but he's still a rookie. So the overall Steelers score comes out to 117, and I have them ranked as the 22nd best roster in the NFL, entering the 2022 NFL season. At number 21 of the Washington Commanders roster. The Commanders roster is an interesting one because it is very, spread out in terms of where their players are tiered for me. I think they've got one truly elite player, and that is Jonathan Allen, who I think is an absolute stud in the interior defensive line. I think McLaurin's a very good receiver. I think Roulier is a very good center. I think Young and Sweat are both very good, but they haven't shown to be elite so far. And I think Payne's very good in the interior defensive line. I think Leno's actually a good left tackle. I think he had a pretty good year last year. I think Norwell's still a good left guard. I think Fuller and Jackson have shown that they're usually good corners. I think Curl's a good safety and has been the last 2 years. And I think Sly's a pretty good kicker. Carson Wentz, I think, is a solid quarterback at this point. I think he's a bit erratic. He has great moments. He has terrible moments. Overall, I think his average is about solid. Gibson, I think, is solid at running back. The offensive line, the right side, I think, is solid. I think Holcomb and McCain are solid defensively. The weak players, Samuel, I think, is a weak player. Davis, Jamin Davis, Benjamin St-Juste, and Tress Way at punter. And then they've got Jahan Dotson, the rookie, coming in as the wide receiver from Penn State. So that comes out to a total of 117. The thing with this roster is there's a majority of the roster is solid of all of these guys, but it's pretty well spread out outside of the elite and rookies. They've got several very good players, several good players, several weak players. So overall, the Washington Commanders, for me, come in as the number 21 NFL roster. At number 20 of the Cleveland Browns roster, I always see the Browns roster referred to as one of the best in the NFL. And while I felt that was the case last season, I don't feel that's the case this season. I think they've got several elite players, don't get me wrong. Teller and Bitonio are absolutely elite at guard. So is Nick Chubb, so is Myles Garrett, so is Denzel Ward at corner. Conklin's great at right tackle. Owusu-Koramoah is great at linebacker. Amari Cooper is great at wide receiver. But those are only 8 guys. There's still 2/3 of the roster left. Njoku, I think, is a good, talented player, but we will see if he can actually match that with his production. Clowney is a good complementary edge, but he's not a great player. Walker, I think, is fine. I think Newsome's good in the nickel, and I think John Johnson's good. I think they have a couple solid players. Like, I think Willis is solid, but I think he has to show me more. Williams, I think, is also solid, and so is Delpit. And I think I'm putting the quarterback position at solid. I think Brissett's weak. I think Watson's very good, but I don't know how many games either of those two are going to play, so it kind of balances out to an overall average of about solid. Peoples-Jones, I think, is weak. Harris at center, I think, is weak. I think Elliott and Bryan in the interior defensive line are weak. And I think Bojorquez at punter is a weak player. Now, they do have a couple rookies with David Bell and Cade York at receiver and kicker. So I can definitely see the Browns roster having a lot of talent, and they do have a lot of elite players. But I think there are more flaws and weaknesses within this roster that people don't acknowledge just because they have a lot of bigger names in the NFL community like Nick Chubb and Myles Garrett, guys like that. But really, when you look deeper into it, there are several holes with this Browns roster that I don't think were there entering last season, and I also don't think enough people are talking about. So still a fairly strong roster, but I don't think nearly as strong as other people are making out. So at number 20, I have the Cleveland Browns with a total score of 128. At number 19, another maybe surprise and another roster that I feel is overrated is the Dallas Cowboys. Again, they've got several big name players here. CeeDee Lamb, Tyron Smith, Zach Martin, Micah Parsons are all no doubt elite. I think Prescott is a very good quarterback. I think DeMarcus Lawrence is a very good edge rusher. I think Trayvon Diggs is a very good corner. I don't think he's elite like some people do, but I think he's very good. I think Dalton Schultz was very good at tight end for them last year, borderline elite. So I have him in the very good tier right now because that was his first year of doing that. But Zeke, I think, is good right now, but I don't think he's any better than that. And I think putting him in good is being nice to his production. I think Michael Gallup's a good player. I think Jaron Curse is a good player. I think Brian Anger is a good player for them at punter. But they've got a lot of solid players, which does hurt their ranking a bit here. Biadasz, Theo, Armstrong, Barr, Brown, Lewis, and Hooker, I think are all solid players. They don't have a ton of weaknesses. Like, I think the only real weakness for them is the interior defensive line. And I guess an improvement kicker that I'm not even going to try to pronounce the last name of. And they've got, Smith, the rookie at left guard, and then Tolbert at receiver, another rookie. Both have some promise, but I'm not really sure what to make of them just yet. So the Cowboys come out to a total roster score of 128, which is only good enough for 19th. So at number 19, I have the Dallas Cowboys roster, a roster that I also feel is a touch overrated entering the 2022 NFL season. At number 18, I have the Kansas City Chiefs roster, another roster that I feel is overrated entering the 2022 season. And again, another roster with a ton of elite talent, and they have even more elite talent than the previous two teams. Mahomes, Kelsey, Tooney, Humphrey, Chris Jones, Harrison Butker, all no doubt elite players, awesome players, among the best at their position. And I think Orlando Brown was very good by the end of the year at left tackle for them. But you look at the rest of the roster, I think Smith and Bolton are good at right guard and linebacker. I think Snead and Fenton are good corners. I think Justin Reed's a good free safety. But I look at again, a lot of solid players here. Mecole Hardman, Juju Smith-Schuster, Wiley at right tackle, Frank Clark, Nandi, Willie Gay, Juan Thornhill, all I think solid players. I think Clyde Edwards-Helaire is a weak starting running back for this team. I don't think he's a starting caliber running back in the NFL based on what I've seen from him. I think Valdez-Scantling is a weak starting wide receiver. I think Townsend is a weak starting punter. I like Karlaftis and I like McDuffie, who they drafted, but this is only enough to get them to a 128 because there's not many very good players and because they have so many just solid players. They have a lot of elite players, but they don't have a lot of depth behind that, and that has been what I think has hurt the Chiefs in the past in my roster rankings, and is what hurts them again this year as they come in for me as the number 18 roster. At number 17, I have the Minnesota Vikings roster. The Vikings roster, I think, quietly is a fairly strong one entering this season. I only think they have two elite players, which is fewer than the last couple of teams we've just done. But I think Dalvin Cook and Justin Jefferson, again, they're clearly elite players, but they've got a lot of very good players for a change. Thielen, Hunter, Zadarius Smith, Eric Kendricks, Harrison Smith, Greg Joseph, even a kicker. The Vikings finally have a reliable kicker. Kirk Cousins is a good quarterback. I think Darisaw and Cleveland and O'Neal are all good offensive linemen. I think Dalvin Tomlinson in the middle with his run defending ability and underrated pass rushing ability, I think, is a good player. And Jordan Hicks, I think, is a good linebacker and has been for years now. So 14 good players is impressive. They have a lot of solid players as well. Osborne, Herb Smith, Watts, Peterson, Dantzler, Sullivan, basically the entire corner core, again, kind of like the Steelers, is just straight up solid. The only weak spots on this team, I think, Bradbury at center, Davis at right guard, and I think Barry is a weak punter. And I like Lewisine a lot at safety. So the Vikings only come out 1 point higher than the previous three teams at 129. But because of the amount of very good and good players they have, that gives them that little bit of an edge. So at number 17, I have the Minnesota Vikings roster. At number 16, I have the Denver Broncos roster. The Broncos roster, I feel, has been a bit overstated and, quite frankly, overrated by some members of the media. You Colin Coward. But they're a good roster. There's no doubt about that. I look at the roster, I see two elite players, and that's Justin Simmons at safety and McManus at kicker. I think McManus is one of the best kickers in the league. I think Wilson's very good at quarterback. I don't think he's elite, but I think coming over from Seattle, he'll be very good. I think Bowles is a very good left tackle. I think Gregory is very good. I think Surtan's very good. I think K'Wan Williams is very good at nickel. I think he's underrated. I think Javonte Williams is good. I think Cortland Sutton's good. I think Judy's good. I think Reisner's good. I think Miners is good. I think Bradley Chubb is good. He might be a little overrated, though. DJ Jones is good, and Sam Martin at punter is good. They do have many solid players like Hamler, Cushenberry, Turner, Purcell, Jewell, Darby, and Kareem Jackson. A couple bigger names there, but I don't think those guys sometimes have matched the production with the name for me to put them higher. And then their tight end is weak, and then Griffith, I think, is weak at linebacker. They don't have any rookies starting currently. So I have their total score coming out to a 130. Again, in this range, it's very close, guys, but I think the Broncos roster comes in as the number 16 roster in the NFL entering the 2022 NFL season. At number 15, I have the Las Vegas Raiders roster, and I think the Raiders roster is being slept on entering the 2022 NFL season. I don't think a lot of people would say the Raiders have a top 15 roster off the top of their head, but I think they do. They have several elite players with Adams coming in. They have Darren Waller at tight end, Crosby at edge, and I think the best kicker/punter duo in the NFL, now that Sam Koch is retired, with Carlson and Cole, who I think are both elite players. I think Carr is a very good quarterback. I think Renfro is very good at receiver. I think they've got a very good left tackle. I think Chandler Jones, even at his age, is still very good. I think Perryman's very good at linebacker, and I think Nate Hobbs is very good in the nickel. I think Jacobs, Brown, and Moehrig are all good players. I think Andre James is a solid player. Hankins and Nichols are in the interior defensive line are solid. Mullen and Rock Yassin are solid at corner. And then there are a couple weak spots, Keelan Cole, Simpson, Cotton, Leatherwood, and Abram. But that comes out to a total score of 131, which is actually better than the Broncos roster. Yes, I think the Raiders roster has a few more upper echelon guys, which helps them for sure. They may have a few more weaknesses, but overall, I think the elite talent outweighs that. So at number 15, I have the Las Vegas Raiders roster. At number 14, I have the Miami Dolphins roster. I think the Miami Dolphins roster is extremely talented in a lot of areas, but I do think they have more weaknesses than some of the very best rosters in the NFL. Howard, Hill, Armstead, and Holland, I believe, are elite players. I think Jalen Waddle, Mike Gesicki, Jerome Baker, Byron Jones, and Ogba are all very good. I think Phillips, Hunt, Wilkins, Needham, and Morstead are all good players. I think Nick Needham actually is an underrated player for them. Tua, I don't think is a weak quarterback like some do. I think he's a solid quarterback. I think Seiler's solid in the interior defensive line. Connor Williams is probably overall a good player, but at center, I'm not completely sure what to make of him. so that's why I have him at solid. I think Wilson's a solid receiver, especially as a third option, and Sanders is a solid kicker. The weaknesses, Eichenberg, who I just am not sure what to make of right now. Austin Jackson, who's been bad in the NFL. Jones at safety, who's not been very good. Landon Roberts, who I think is past his best and it was never really that good of a player. And Edmonds, who I think is a weak starter at running back. So the Dolphins roster comes out to a total of 131. They have a lot of talent, but I do think they have several weaknesses, which keeps them from being even higher on this list, edging into the top 10. So for that, I have the Miami Dolphins roster at number 14, entering the 2022 NFL season. At number 13, I have the Tennessee Titans roster. The Titans roster is still pretty strong to very strong. You look at the elite players that they have. Ben Jones is an elite center. Derrick Henry, obviously, we know how good he is. Jeffrey Simmons is an absolutely a monster in the interior defensive line, and Kevin Byard might be the best safety in the NFL. The very good players that they have, Autry, Landry, in the interior defensive line and on the edge. Cunningham, I think, is really underrated at linebacker. Fulton, Hooker, and Bullock at corner, safety, and kicker. Ryan Tannehill, for all the flack he's gotten this offseason, I still think is a good quarterback and has been the last 3 years cumulatively. Nate Davis, I think, as a guard is a good player, and I think David Long at linebacker is a good player. I think they have a solid overall roster when it comes to the solid players. I don't know why it took me so long to say that. Robert Woods, Austin Hooper, Taylor Lewan, Bud Dupree, Caleb Farley, Molden, and Kern are all solid players, so they've got a healthy amount of solid players. They're not too many, but enough to make them a fairly strong team. They don't have a lot of weak spots. The only weak spots they have to me are Westbrook-Akeen at receiver, Brewer at left guard, and Ray Duns at right tackle. So the offensive line could be a bit of a concern, but overall, it's still a fairly strong unit in areas, and Treylon Burks is a rookie receiver with a lot of promise. So the Titans' overall score comes out to 133, which is, as I said, the 13th best roster in the NFL. So I think the Titans roster is being slept on a bit entering the 2022 season, and for me comes in at number 13. At number 12, surprisingly, is the New England Patriots. And the Patriots roster, I do feel, is a little bit better than I may have given them credit for in the past. I think Andrews is an elite center. I think Jonathan Jones is so crucial to that secondary, and he's an elite nickelback, and I think Bailey's an elite punter. But they have a lot. They have a lot of very good players. Folk, Judon, Barmore, Phillips, McCourty, Brown, Henry, Onwenu. All of those guys, to me, are very good at their position, which really helps their ranking here. I think Bourne is a good receiver. I think Isaiah Wynn's a good right tackle. I think Mac Jones is good. And I think Damian Harris is a good running back. I look at their solid players, Mills, I think, Godshaw, Myers, Parker, and Bentley. And then the only real weak starters I see are Raekwon McMillan, Deatrick Wise, and Mitchell, who I all think have proven to be not that good in the NFL. And Cole Strange is the rookie. I still think they overdrafted him, but he's whatever. He should be at least okay. So I think the Patriots roster, it comes out to a total score of 139. And I think it's a bit better than I would have perceived it. So maybe don't sleep on the Pats roster just yet. So at number 12, I have the New England Patriots roster. At number 11, the defending Super Bowl champions LA Rams roster. The thing with the Rams roster that you have to take into account here is they have gone all in. And so because they've gone all in, it has caused them to be elite and very good at multiple positions, but it's also seen them with more weaknesses than some of the very best rosters, I think. So you look at the elite players that they have. Cooper Kupp, Aaron Donald, Jalen Ramsey, and Matt Gay at kicker. Matt Stafford, you can make an argument's elite. I think he's very good. If he plays the way he did last year, I'd say he's elite, though, for sure. Havenstein at right tackle, Leonard Floyd, Bobby Wagner, who they added, and Brian Allen at center. They're good players: Robinson, Higbee, Edwards, Gaines, Hill, and Fuller. The solid players: Jefferson, Noteboom, Hollins, Ernest Jones, David Long Jr., and Nick Scott. And then in the weak positions, I have Cam Akers because he wasn't very good last year, and he's coming off an injury. And Dixon at punter, and then Bruce is a rookie. So the Rams have a good roster. There's no doubt about that. I just think there's other stronger overall, more complete rosters than them, which is why they come in for me at number 11. Because of how they've built their roster, it's caused them to not be the number 1 overall roster, but a roster more than good enough at the top to carry them to deep in the playoffs and the Super Bowl like they won last season. So number 11, I have the Los Angeles Rams roster. At number 10, I have the San Francisco 49ers roster. The Niners are another team with a ton of elite players. Deebo Samuel, George Kittle, Trent Williams, Nick Bosa, Fred Warner, Jimmy Ward even, I think. And Robbie Gould at kicker, who's been elite forever, I feel like. But they've got 7 elite players. That's insane. But they have even more players that are solid, which I'll get to. But I think Armstead and Ward are very good in the interior defensive line and at corner. I think Ayuk, yes, Lenny. I think Mike McGlinchey is good. I think Samson, Ebukam, and Greenlaw are all good. I think Trey Lance is a solid quarterback for the system that they run. But I'm not sure if he's even there yet as a player. I think Mitchell's a solid player. Jennings, Brunskill, Kinlaw, Mosley, Denard, and Mitch Wishnowsky at punter. So there's a lot of solid players for the 49ers. And if some of those guys were good or very good, that would improve them, I think. This is still a great roster, though. There's no doubt about that. I think Banks and Hufanga are the only real question marks, and Buford, I guess, because he's a rookie. But still, those are the true, legit question marks for this roster. It's a really strong roster, and certainly I think worthy of being in the top 10 for me at number 10. At number 9, I have the Baltimore Ravens roster. The Ravens roster is back to being a Ravens roster that I recognize. One that is filled out really across the board with a lot of players at every level, except the bad levels, weak. Only 2 players in that weak category, that being Duvernay and Prochet, both a wide receiver, funnily enough. Mark Andrews and Ronnie Stanley, truly elite players when both are healthy, especially Stanley. Humphrey at corner, I think, is elite. I think Williams at safety is elite. And I think Justin Tucker, obviously, is an elite kicker. I think Lamar Jackson's a very good quarterback. I think some people would have him in elite. I think some people would have him in good, which I think is straight up disrespectful. Kevin Zeitler, I think, is very good at right guard. I think Campbell is still very good in the interior defensive line. Tyus Bowser is a beast. And Marcus Peters is a very good corner. Bateman, I think, is a good receiver, and I think he showed that when he played last season. Moses at right tackle is good, has been for years. Pierce is still good in the interior defensive line, though not what he once was. Bynes is good at linebacker, I think, underrated. And Chuck Clark, again, another underrated player at safety. They've got solid players. J.K. Dobbins, who was solid for them in 2020. Powers, who's a solid, underrated starting caliber plus left guard for them. Owe, who I think is a solid edge rusher. Queen, who I think is a solid linebacker. And Fuller, who they added at nickelback, I think is solid. As I said, the only 2 weak players are Duvernay and Brochet, and they have a couple rookies coming in. Stout coming in at punter. We'll see how he does. And then Tyler Linderbaum at center, who was my favorite interior offensive lineman from this draft and who I think will make an instant impact. So the Baltimore Ravens roster is one of the more complete rosters in the NFL. It is back to being a Ravens roster, and I'm excited to see how they perform in 2022. I have them coming in at number 9. At number 8, I have the Indianapolis Colts roster. I think the Colts roster is not the absolute best in the league. I think their ceiling is probably around borderline top 5 in terms of rosters, but I think they have a pretty high floor, which helps them. They're a decently deep team. They're not the greatest team in terms of depth, but I look at the elite players, and there's several. Jonathan Taylor, Quentin Nelson, Braden Smith, DeForest Buckner, Shaquille or Darius Leonard, and Kenny Moore at nickelback. I think Pittman, Kelly, Okereke, and Stephon Gilmore are all very good at their positions. I think Matt Ryan is a good quarterback coming in from the Falcons. I think Matt Pryor is underrated, good at left tackle. I think Payne, Ngakoue, Stewart, Blackman, Blankenship, and Sanchez are all good players. Blankenship and Sanchez, of course, in special teams. I think Rogers and Ali Cox are solid players. I think Campbell and Pinter are weak players. And I think Pierce, who has been having a great camp, is a rookie, obviously, and then Cross is a rookie, but I like both players. So the Colts roster comes out to a total score of 142. I think this is one of the stronger rosters in the NFL, and I wouldn't sleep on their overall roster when you look deeper into it. So at number 8, I have the Indianapolis Colts roster. At number 7, I have the Green Bay Packers roster. The Packers roster has been one of the most complete rosters in the NFL for a few years now, and I think they remain that this season with one condition, and that is, I guess, they don't have any proven good wide receivers. That's what everybody's talking about, but you look at the rest of the roster. Aaron Rodgers, the back-to-back MVP, David Bakhtiari, Rashawn Gary, Kenny Clark, Jair Alexander, Adrian Amos, all are elite players. I think Aaron Jones, Elgton Jenkins, Preston Smith, Devondre Campbell, Rasul Douglas even, and nickel, and Mason Crosby are all very good. I think Stokes and Savage are good young players that are getting better. You look at the solid players, Lazard, Tanyan, Runyon, Myers, and Lowry. I think Cobb and Watkins are a weak wide receiver core right now. And I would say Newman and O'Donnell are weak at right guard and punter. And then Quay Walker's a rookie who I like, but he's still a rookie. So they actually come out to the same overall score that the Colts do. Both are at a 142 score here. But I do think the Packers roster is a bit stronger, just injecting personal bias into this. So I think the Packers are the number 7 best roster entering the 2022 season. I do think that receiver position hurts them from being even higher, because if they had, even if they had a Devontae Adams, that would put them at 151, and that would have them in my top 5. I'll just spoil that right now. So at number 7, I have the Green Bay Packers roster. At number 6, I have the Los Angeles Chargers roster. The Chargers roster is absolutely stacked. Yes, stacked entering the 2022 NFL season. They have 7 elite players, according to me. Justin Herbert, Rashawn Slater, Corey Linsley, Joey Bosa, Khalil Mack, J.C. Jackson, Derwin James. All are absolutely elite to me. Austin Eckler is very good at running back. Keenan Allen, very good. Mike Williams, very good. Matt Filer, very good. Bryce Callahan, very good. Sebastian Joseph Day, I think, is good at in the interior defensive line. I think Tranquil is good at linebacker. I think Adderley is a good safety. And I think Hopkins is honestly a pretty good kicker for them. I do. I think Everett's a solid tight end. I think Austin Johnson's a solid interior defensive lineman. I think Samuel's a solid corner that's only getting better. I don't know if he'll ever be his brother or his father, but he's getting better. Palmer, I think, is a weak third receiver. Pipkins, I think, is weak at right tackle. Murray, I think, is weak at linebacker. And Scott, I think, is weak at punter. And they did drive Zion Johnson, who I like. But they overall come out to a score of 149, which is a bit of a gap between them and number 7 here. And they're bordering on that top 5 for me, coming in at number 6 in terms of my roster rankings. At number 5 is the Buffalo Bills roster. The Bills roster, again, another absolutely stacked roster here. I think a bit more complete than the Chargers, and only just 1 point at 150 above them. Josh Allen, Micah Hyde, Jordan Boyer, Stephon Diggs, Tre'Davious White, all elite players. I think Von Miller at Oliver, Teron Johnson, Matt Milano, Dawkins at tackle, and then Dawson Knox at tight end are all very good. I think Davis is a good receiver. I think Saffold and Morse are good offensive linemen. Edmonds, I think, is a good linebacker for as questionable as he is in coverage. And Bass, I think, is a good kicker. So that's 2/3 of the roster that is good to above that. So just off that, you know this is a stacked team. Ryan Bates, I think, is a solid player at right guard. Crowder, I think, is a solid player at receiver. Rousseau, I think, is a solid player at edge. And Daquan Jones, I think, is a solid player in the interior defensive line. So I look at the only weak players here are Spencer Brown at right tackle and Devin Singletary, who isn't necessarily a bad player. He just is relative to being a starting running back, but he could even be better than that. And then Elam, I love at corner. I was even more impressed with him in the preseason, and I was already high on him coming out of the draft. And then their punter, who's also a rookie. So the Bills come out to 150. I think the Super Bowl favorites, the Buffalo Bills, come into this season with the number 5 roster in the NFL. At number 4 of the New Orleans Saints roster, I don't think people understand how stacked this Saints roster is. Alvin Kamara is going to play the full year. He's at running back. He's awesome. All right. Ryan Ramczyk, even though he had a down last 2 years, I still think is an elite right tackle. Mario Davis is a top 3 linebacker in football. Marshawn Lattimore is a top 5 corner in football. Tyrann Mathieu is still an awesome safety. There's 5 elite players right there. Michael Thomas coming back is having a great camp. Eric McCoy, I think, is very good at center. Jordan and Davenport, both are very good. Onyemata, very good in the interior defensive line. Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, very good at nickel. Marcus May, who they added, very good at safety. Will Lutz coming back at kicker, very good. I don't think they have any good players, though. That's the surprise thing. I think they go from very good to solid, which might actually prevent them from being the best roster in the NFL, given some of the point totals here. If you were to flip a couple of these guys to good, the Saints may be 2 or even 1. Who knows? Jameis Winston, I have as a solid quarterback. I think Jarvis Landry at this point is a solid receiver. I don't think he's good anymore. Pete is solid. He's good enough in run blocking that it makes up for his pass pro. Shai Tuttle's solid. Pete Werner is solid. Paulson Adebo. I do think of all of these guys probably has the best opportunity to become good, but right now I'd say he's solid. Adam Troutman, I think, is a weak tight end. I think Ruiz is weak at guard, and I think Gillikin is weak at punter. And then obviously Olave is the rookie receiver, and Penning is the rookie left tackle coming in. The Saints come out to a total score of 153. I don't think people understand how deep and how talented this roster is at all levels, especially in that defensive side of the ball. So at number 4 are the New Orleans Saints roster. At number 3 is the Philadelphia Eagles. The Philadelphia Eagles roster is absolutely stacked and is the only NFL roster without a below average player, I think, starting for them at any position. I think every player on this starting roster is solid or better. I think A.J. Brown, Maliata, Kelsey, Lane Johnson, Darius Slay, and Jake Elliott are all elite at kicker. I think Dallas Goedert, Hassan Reddick, Javon Hargrave, and Fletcher Cox are all very good in the interior defensive line. I think Devontae Smith, Dickerson, Samalu, Graham, Edwards, Bradbury, and Maddox are all good players. And I think Jalen Hurts, Miles Sanders, Quez Watkins, White at linebacker, Epps at safety, Anthony Harris at safety, and Sipos at punter are all solid. So that overall, that comes out to a 155 score. They don't have quite enough on top to be at number 2 or number 1, although they were very close to number 2. But this Eagles roster, from top to bottom in the starting unit, is just stacked. So at number 3 of the Philadelphia Eagles roster. At number 2 is the Cincinnati Bengals roster. The Bengals roster is absolutely stacked this season, and I don't think enough people are acknowledging that. You look at the elite players they have: Joe Burrow, Joe Mixon, Jamar Chase, Trey Hendrickson, Mike Hilton, Jesse Bates, and Evan McPherson at kicker are all just no doubt slam dunk elite talent and elite players that I don't think are getting enough credit for being so, and I don't think this team's getting enough credit for being as talented at the top as they are. Higgins, Collins, who they got at right tackle, Lyle Collins, TJ Reader in the interior defensive line, Logan Wilson at linebacker, Chidobe Awuzie at corner, and then Von Bell at safety are all very good players to me. And then Boyd, Williams, Karras, Kappa, Hubbard, and Hill are all good players. So that's 19 good players for the Bengals, and in terms of the grading system, that really helps them. I think Pratt is a solid linebacker. I think their only weak real players to me are Hurst at tight end, Carmen at right guard, Eli Apple, obviously, and then Huber at punter. But that comes out to a total score of 157, and because of the number of good to better than that players that they have, the Bengals roster comes out to me as one of the best in the league at number 2. And at number 1, the most talented roster in the NFL to me is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers are absolutely stacked once again, even without Ryan Jensen at center. If this team had Ryan Jensen, they would be at 177 for me, which would be by far, that'd be 20 points higher than the next team, which is the Bengals, obviously. Tom Brady, still to me the best quarterback in the league. Mike Evans, an elite wide receiver. Mason, Wirfs, still elite offensive lineman, even without Jensen. Shaq Barrett, Vita Vea, Levante David, Antoine Winfield Jr., all are elite players. Fournette is very good. Chris Godwin's very good. Donovan Smith is very good at left tackle. Akeem Hicks, Devin White, Carlton Davis, Jamel Dean, and Ryan Suckup are all very good players. And then I look at the good players they have. Julio Jones, I still think is a good player, and Logan Ryan at safety. So that's 18 out of the 24 being good or above starters. And because 8 of those guys are elite and 8 of those guys are very good, 2/3 of the roster is just in the very good tier, which just catapults their overall score. It just gives them gobs and gobs of point total for this grading system. The solid players to me, Cam Brate, Joe Tryon, Sean Murphy-Bunting, and then Hainsey at center is the only weak player to me just because we haven't seen him. Gadecki, of course, is the rookie coming in, and Jake Camarda, punter, my boy from Georgia. Now, the Bucs roster to me is the strongest in the NFL, but who do you think is the strongest NFL roster? Leave it in the comment section below. I hope you guys enjoy this video, and God bless.